Hey guys, welcome to Thursday's reading lesson. Today is going to be our last reading lesson of the school year. So after that, like I was telling some of the other kids, there's a lot of reading lessons still in your book. So if you want to keep, your brain fresh and, still reading throughout the summer, you can do some of those, or even just read some of the articles because they're pretty interesting articles about different things, science, some are fiction, some are nonfiction. So they would be really good to, keep reading. The more you read, the more words you learn and the better and fresh everything will stay and you won't lose that over the summer. So today we're going to be on page 362 and it's going to look like this, and it's called Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and it's about the Mariana Trench that we've talked about before, and we also had a video on that about them going to the bottom of that trench. So this is about one of the submarines that went down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the first people who have actually did that, and it was called the Trieste. And then we're going to kind of use our graph and, our diagram and our timeline to compare the information that comes from the article and the information that comes from the diagram in the timeline. So I'm going to read that to you. And this is an informational science article. And the theme of this article is exploring the seas. So the theme is kind of like, exploring the seas or exploring the ocean. So that would be the theme of the article. So I'm going to read this to you, and then we're going to go over the questions and look at the diagram in the timeline. So it says, on January 23rd, 1960, 6-foot waves rocked the surface 7 miles above the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean. Carefully, Jacques Piccard and Donald Walsh rowed a small rubber boat toward the Trieste. This craft would soon take them almost 7 miles down to the deepest part of the ocean floor. No one had ever explored the Mariana Trench before. It was so deep that the weight of the miles of water above it would crush most crafts. The Trieste was built to withstand such pressure. However, so the men inside should be safe on their underwater journey, during the descent, the men on the Trieste would communicate by radio with the surface. Shortly after 8 a.m., Piccard and Walsh jammed in the Trieste's observation gondola. The space was so small that they could barely move, but they were ready. Water from the ocean filled the water ballast tanks. Slowly, the Trieste began traveling down to the trench. So down here is where the two men were. This all was filled with gasoline or with water, depending on the certain tanks. So they had to fit into this tiny little area to go down. At 340 feet, Piccard released gasoline from the tanks, letting water fill them instead. Water weighs more than gasoline, so this made the craft sink farther into the darkness. An hour later, and a mile farther down, the men saw plankton. These are tiny ocean creatures that glow in specks of yellowish green. 2 hours later, they were more than 5 miles down and there was no sign of life. A little past noon, they were about a half mile from the bottom. Then they heard a small explosion. Tension flooded the observation gondola, but nothing seemed wrong, so they agreed to keep going. Just before 1 o'clock, they reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench. They had landed. There were no other human. They had landed where no other human had been before. They flashed lights and saw a flat white fish about a foot long that Piccard described as a sole. Little red shrimps swam in front of their window. Both discoveries were groundbreaking. Now humans knew that animals lived in the deepest part of the ocean. And this is the diagram of the Trieste, and it shows you where they were, that they had a little window, the lead ballast chambers. So these are all filled with lead pellets, which helps them get down. And once they release them, it'll help them get up. Shows the propellers, the water tanks, gasoline tanks, the vent. So it gives you an idea of what the Trieste looked like and parts of it. Then the men turned on the inside light. Picard spotted the cause of the earlier noise. It was a cracked window. Now he became more worried about their safety. Picard released 800 pounds of lead pellets from the ballast chambers. Releasing the weight caused the Trieste to move upwards. Picard and Walsh could hear people speaking on the radio, but for some reason, no one could hear them speaking back. At 5 p.m., the Trieste emerged. No one had heard Picard on the wireless for hours, so the people above did not know what to expect. The crews on both ships watched breathlessly for movement from the Trieste. They waited for 15 minutes, then suddenly the two men emerged unharmed. They had traveled to the deepest part of the ocean and made history. So if you look here, this is a timeline of the voyage of the Trieste. So you see at 8 a.m., the steel door shuts, water floods the water ballast tanks. At 340 feet, Picard releases the gasoline here. Then they go down. The men change into dry clothing and eat chocolate. Then they go down. At 10 a.m., they're kind of almost to the midnight zone. See, there's still a little bit of sunlight. Then they hear the explosion at 12 p.m. Then they reach the bottom, which was 35,800 feet. Then this was Picard's last message that the people heard. So that was around 1:15. Then Picard releases the lead pellets and begins to go up. At 2 p.m., they're still going up. Between 2 and 4, they're in this area. At 4 p.m., they're reaching the twilight zone. And before 6 p.m., the Trieste resurfaces. And then at 6 p.m. is when they were getting out, between 5 and 6. So you see that this timeline gives us a lot of information of what was happening during specific times and what zones they were in. Remember yesterday we talked about the sunlight zone, then the twilight zone, then the midnight zone. So we're going to look at the next page on 365, and we're going to look at question 1. And it says, from the text, you could infer that the voyage of the Trieste was a dangerous research project. Which two details from the timeline best support the inference? So at A, 8:30 a.m., Picard releases gasoline. B, 9:15 a.m., men change into dry clothing. C, at 12 p.m., explosion heard. D, reaches bottom. E, Picard's last message on wireless. Or F, Trieste resurfaces. So what would be showing danger? Well, of course, the explosion heard, right? That would show danger. And also that they couldn't get his messages, E. So they weren't sure what had happened. And when you're in that situation where you're so far in the ocean, the chance of a window cracking and you not having enough oxygen and water filling up and all those different things could happen. So it's a dangerous thing to do, especially when you don't know how the Trieste would help hold up under all those pounds of water, right? They're going down 35,000 feet. So which detail from the diagram of the Trieste is supported by the text? So the diagram is on page 363, and that shows the different features. Remember, we looked at the gasoline tanks, the observation gondola, the lead ballast chambers, the propeller. So the answer would be A. A small window in the observation gondola allowed the crew to see outside the Trieste. So it shows us that in the diagram, and it also tells us that in the text. How does it tell us that? Well, that's going to be our answer in part B. To underline the two sentences from the text to support your answer. So we're going to underline, they saw a flat white fish about a foot long that Picard described as sole. Little red shrimp swam in front of their window. So it's showing us a window in the diagram, and it's also telling us that they saw shrimp out of the window in the text. So on our next page, 366, it says in paragraph 7, What is the meaning of the word groundbreaking? So if we look back, this is actually paragraph 7. So it says they saw a flat white fish about a foot long that Picard described as sole. Little red shrimp swam in front of their window. Both discoveries were groundbreaking. Now humans knew that animals lived in the deepest part of the ocean. So what would groundbreaking mean? Underground, underneath the ocean, new and important, or very destructive? Well, it would mean new and important, right? They got to the bottom and they saw species that they had never seen before. They saw fish, they saw the red shrimp. They say that even in the ocean now, there's about 1,000 species that we don't even know about. So this was very new and important, which would be a groundbreaking discovery. So let's look at number 4, and we're going to look at the details. So the box below includes details about the voyage. So the designers of the Trieste only meant for it to be used one time. Releasing lead pellets helped the craft rise to the surface of the ocean. After entering the Trieste, the crew changed into dry clothes and had a snack. The crew saw shrimp at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Gasoline powered the Trieste's motor as it pushed the craft to the ocean floor. So these details we're going to use to put into our chart. So our chart says, complete the chart and write one detail that only the text says, one detail that only the visual shows. And the visual we're going to use for this one is our timeline. And then this one, what the visual shows and what the text says. So what is one thing only the text says? The crew saw shrimp at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So that's where we're going to get this. The crew saw shrimp at the bottom of the Mariana Trench was only in our text. They didn't have it in our diagram. They didn't say it in the timeline. So that's why we would put that detail there. So if you need a few minutes to write, you can always pause this and write and then unpause and move on. So what does the visual show? So this visual we're going to use is the visual on page 364, and it's our timeline. So the visual tells us the steel door shuts, water floods the water ballast tanks. Picard releases the gasoline, men change into dry clothing and eat chocolate. Explosion heard, reaches bottom, Picard's last message on wireless, Picard releases lead pellets, begins ascent, Trieste resurfaces. So what does the visual only tell us, but not the text? Well, the visual tells us after entering the Trieste, the crew changed into dry clothes and had a snack. That was not in our text. It was only in the timeline. So in the text, they left that part out. In the timeline, they added that just to give us another idea of what was happening during those times. So now we're going to look at what the text says and a visual shows. So the text and the timeline said, releasing lead pellets helped the craft rise to the surface. So because they released all that weight, the craft is going to go to the surface faster. So go ahead and pause if you need to. If not, we're going to do the short response on page 367. So the short response is, how did the diagram and the timeline support the details in the passage? So from looking at our timeline and looking at our diagram, how did it help us and what did it help us with? The diagram gave information about what the Trieste looks like, and the timeline summarizes the events in order. So those two helped us with all the information that the text gave us, and then the timeline and the diagram, to kind of put it all together to see a clear picture about the voyage of the Trieste. So by using all that information together, we were able to get a better picture and learn a lot more about their voyage, how long it took, what was happening in between, what the actual Trieste looked like. where they were in the Trieste when they were going down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So if you need to pause, go ahead and pause. Like I said, this will be our last Zoom lesson that I will have taped and recorded for you. We may do some fun things during the week next week. Remember, you do have a day off though. Monday is a holiday, it's Memorial Day. So we will definitely keep you guys posted. And if I don't see you after this, I hope you have a great summer, and you better come see me next year. If you're coming back to Meavers, come stop in and say hi. Of course, I want to see you guys. I miss you all a lot. So I hope you have a great Thursday. And like I said, have a great summer if I don't see you. All right, bye.